Okay, welcome back. We're doing May-June 2019 question paper 13. So like all the other question papers, we're going to go through the duplications from question paper 11, circle the correct answer, and if you're still unsure, go to that video for the full explanation. Okay, which item will be registered as an outflow on the services section? So remember, outflow is money that's going out, right? And we're looking for something that's a service. So money paid by chemical producers in the US for foreign oil, money paid for producers is not going to be a service, right? So we can straight away assume it's not that answer. Money paid by foreign firms for US cars, well, that would be money coming in, right? Not money going out. And it also wouldn't be a service. Money paid by migrant workers in the US to their families overseas, again, that's not going to be a service. But money paid by US tourists visiting attractions in other countries, that is a service, and it would be an outflow because it's money leaving America and going to other countries. 28. Changes in the foreign exchange rate of a country resulted in a depreciation. What is not likely to happen? Okay, so first thing is, with a depreciation, we need to understand what happens with that. So with a depreciation, the price of exports go down, so the total amount of exports should go up, assuming it's elastic. The price of imports will go up, which means that the total level of imports will go down, assuming again that it has an elastic demand. Okay, so if we keep that in mind and we look at the questions here, cost of imported raw materials will fall. We know that's incorrect. What is not going to happen? So that will be correct, because we would expect the price of imports to come up, which you can see listed on the right hand side here. So the cost of imported raw materials falling is something that is not going to happen. Countries' export trading position will become more competitive. That will happen because our total exports will go up. Countries' residents will find it more expensive to take holidays abroad. So same thing, that will happen. Our currency now becomes less valuable in terms of another currency, so it becomes more expensive for us to take holidays. And the current account deficit will remain unchanged. Again, that is unlikely to happen as well, just like A, but the cost of raw materials falling is certainly not going to happen. 24. What action might be taken by an economy wishing to produce a greater range of products? Okay, so want to produce a greater range of products, we're definitely not going to concentrate on the production of primary products. We know that if we focus on the agricultural industry, it's not going to result in a greater range, and it's generally less efficient than secondary and tertiary sectors. If we encourage imports, remember imports is what's coming into the country from another country. That is not going to help us to produce a greater range of products. But if we encourage investment by multinational companies, multinational companies will come in and they will allow us to not just export more, but they will also mean that more types of goods and services are produced in our country, which will allow us to produce a greater range. And increasing the interest rates, the same effect. That's unlikely to allow us to make more goods or products. What might cause prices to rise because of cost push inflation? Remember, cost push inflation is where the cost of production for the economy is increasing, right? So anything that's going to increase our cost of production is going to be something that will cause our cost push inflation. Now, if we increase government spending on education, what that's going to do is, over the long term, that's going to move our AS to the right. Okay, which would be the opposite effect, because if our cost of production goes up, we can assume that our AS will move to the left. Increase in household consumption, that's going to affect AD, and that's going to move AD to the right, because consumer expenditure is a component of AD. An increase in the balance of payments surplus, okay, that's something that may happen, but unlikely with cost push inflation, and again, it's not going to affect the cost of production here. Whereas if we have an increase in wages and salaries, that will result in the cost of production for firms or for the entire economy to increase, which may move AS to the left and cause our cost push inflation. Question 22. What is most likely to have caused a long-term decrease in the numbers employed? So long-term, we know that we're going to be looking for structural or cyclical unemployment. Like we described in question paper 12, frictional is the short term, so it's not going to be frictional. Seasonal is a type of frictional, so it's not going to be that either. And the same, voluntary unemployment is where people decide to give up their jobs due to a reduction in the wage rates. It's not going to be a long-term decrease. Technological unemployment, however, this is a form of structural unemployment, which we know is one of our types of the long-term unemployment types. Okay, what is included in HDI? Just like we gave to you before, that's life expectancy at birth. How long we're expected to live for. It doesn't account for gender inequality, it doesn't account for political freedom, and it doesn't account for the impact on pollution. Check over my previous videos on HDI if you're still confused on this question. We talk through all the different components on HDI. Same questions come up all the time. Question 20. Why might GDP per head be underestimated in a developed economy? Okay, so for this one, what we're talking about here is why would GDP per head be underestimated? It would generally be underestimated because of something that we call the informal economy. Okay, and the informal economy is where people are running businesses or taking cash payments where they're not declaring it as revenue. So therefore there's no tax on it, which means that it's not being accounted for in our GDP. So it's nothing to do with pollution, it's nothing to do with financial services output. That would be included in GDP. Primary sector would be included in GDP. it must mean that it is part of the hidden economy, which is aka also known as the informal economy. Okay, money that's being paid which is not being declared as revenue. Okay, what does the diagram show? Inflation is proportionately related to wage levels. Does the diagram indicate that? No, it doesn't. Proportionately means that they would be at the same rate. So if that was the case, wages would be 1% and prices would be 1% as well. But they're clearly not related because there's gaps between them of larger quantities at 2015 and smaller quantities of 2000. The gap is constant. Well, we can see the gap is not constant because the gap gets bigger in 2015 between the difference in the wage rates and the price level. Wages were highest in 2010. Again, we can see that's not true because everything above the line here is an increase in the wage rates. So that means that after 2010, they're continuing to get wage increases every year. Even though it's decreasing by the percentage that they're getting, it's still, for example, 0.4% higher here in, let's say, 2016 than it was in 2015. But what we can conclude is that wage earners have increasingly less purchasing power. The purchasing power difference will be the difference here between the inflation rate and the wage rate, right? So if you take 2000 for example, in 2000 they got a 0.5% increase in wages and there was, let's say, a 1% increase in inflation. So in the year 2000 for example, that means that their real wages would be 0.5%. Okay, so they'd actually be losing 0.5% worth of purchasing power. And when we get to 2015 and as we go along the years here, we can see that that difference gets more dramatic. So it's about 2% in 2016 and 0.5 here. So in 2016, for example, an estimated difference in the real wage rates would be minus 1.5%, which means that their purchasing power is now gone down by a higher percentage than it did in the year 2000. Sometimes the government regulates the market to protect the interest of consumers. What kind of regulation would achieve this? Okay, so what we're trying to do here is when we're trying to protect the consumers, we're essentially trying to stop the monopolies, right? So if we discourage economies of scale, that leads to lower costs. First of all, if we discourage economies of scale, that's not going to lead to lower costs because economies of scale is, as the firm gets bigger, their average costs come down. So if we discourage that, it's going to result in costs going up, which means prices for consumers will also go up. So that would not be protecting the interest of consumers. If we prevent mergers from resulting in high monopoly prices, that will protect the interest of consumers because it's going to keep the price lower for the consumer, and that is their main interest, the price of the product. Reducing shop opening hours is going to make it harder for consumers to get the products, and reducing the range is going to reduce the choice and the availability of products on the market, again, which are not going to be protecting the interests of consumers. 17. What is the most likely effect of the government reducing the money supply? So the government reducing the money supply, that is a contractionary monetary policy, and that policy is designed to move aggregate demand to the left. Okay, so when aggregate demand goes to the left, what happens? Real GDP will go left, and then our output will go down, our employment will go down, and our national income will go down. So growth will not increase, growth will decrease because our AD is moving left and our real GDP is going down. Inflation will not increase, inflation will decrease for the same reason. AD left, real GDP down. And tax rates will decrease. Not going to have an effect on the tax rates. That would be a specific type of policy, which would be an expansionary fiscal policy designed to move AD to the right. Okay, it's not an effect of a decrease in the money supply. But employment will decrease, yes, and we can see that because we know that employment is linked to a change in our real GDP. Employment follows the same pattern as real GDP does. Real GDP down, national income down, employment down, living standards down. And the opposite effect, real GDP up, employment up, living standards up, income up. Question 16. Which form of taxation always takes an increasing percentage of the taxpayer's income as it rises? Okay, that would be a progressive tax. So just for you to be aware, remember the difference here. Progressive taxes, as you earn more, you pay a higher percentage of tax. Regressive, as you earn more, you pay a smaller percentage of tax. And proportionate, high earners and low earners pay the same percentage of tax. What is an example of a technical economy of scale? Remember, technical is relating to the capital, okay? So it's basically as they get bigger, they get access to more advanced and better capital that will allow them to decrease their average costs. So the bank provide loans at a lower interest rate. That is not a technical economy of scale. That is a financial economy of scale, which is an economy of scale. It is just a different type. Bigger firms hire more workers. That is not, as we said, an example of the capital. Firms obtain discounts when buying in bulk. Same, that is another type of economy of scale. It's what we called a buying economy, but it is not a technical economy, which is where as a firm gets bigger, they have to buy more raw materials, and because they're buying more, they may get more discounts available from the suppliers. So machines are used close to their full capacity. That would be the technical economy of scale. It'd be linked to capital, using advanced or better machinery, which allows us to decrease our costs. Okay, which business organization is most likely to have unlimited liability? So I'll just give you the answer for this, no longer on the syllabus, so you don't need to worry about it, but it's a sole trader. Okay, all of the other ones here, A, B, and C, they would have what we call limited liability. Okay, now what does that mean? Unlimited liability basically means that they not only lose the money they invest in the business, but they are liable as an individual should the business go out of business and owe debt, which means that they can lose their own car, their own house, as an individual that they have also. Whereas for limited liability, these people, they're only going to lose the money they invest into the business if the business goes bust. Question 9. What advantage do coins have that make them more suitable than banknotes to act as money? So that is their durability. Okay, banknotes are not as durable as coins are. All the others are characteristics or functions of money, but the durability is the one advantage that the coins have over banknotes. Okay, demand for gas in a country becomes price inelastic. Why can I no longer use the colors here? Oh, okay. What is most likely to happen as a result of this? So what we'll do is we'll draw a demand and a supply diagram here, right? And we'll show it. Wage rates, and then the quantity of labor. Demand is price inelastic, so demand is going to be relatively vertical. And we'll put our supply here. Okay, now gas workers will be less likely to be successful in obtaining wage rates. That is not true. They're going to be more likely to obtain wage increases. And to explain why, if we look at our curve, when it's price inelastic, what do we know happens? We know that price, when there's changes, let's say in supply in this case, right? So shifts in supply here, for example, then price will change by more than the quantity. So it's more responsive to a change in price, less responsive to a change in the quantity of labor. So because it's inelastic, this area would be the price change, which is significantly higher than this area, which is the quantity change, right? So it's going to make them more likely to be successful in obtaining wage increases, because it's going to keep the demand high, and it means that should there be any change in supply, it will have a significant impact on the wage rate. Whereas if it's elastic, the price would only change by a little bit and the quantity would change massively. It's got nothing to do with total expenditure. That's to do with regular demand and regular PED, right? Not when it comes about the PED for labor. Seven, product is PED of minus 0.5. What happens when the price changes? So what's happened here? The price has gone down by 20%. Okay. Now the PED is negative 0.5, so that means that our quantity which is demanded on top here we'll call X. And we input our formula. X will therefore have to be plus 10% in order to give us 0.5 as our PED value which we're told. Okay, what is meant by equilibrium in a market? So remember, very simply, equilibrium is where demand is equaling to supply. Okay, so where products offered for sale equal consumer demand, straightforward, that's going to be our correct answer. Profit is at the expected level, has nothing to do with equilibrium. Either does quantity of inputs, quantity of outputs, either does total costs and total revenue. It's demand equaling supply, which means that when products are offered for sale, the supply, they're equal to the consumer demand or our demand. Okay, question 5. So, China has built a new railway in Kenya from the capital Nairobi to the seaport of Mombasa. Kenya must repay the cost of the railway to China. Journey time has been reduced significantly, but fares Fares have increased and farmers have lost agricultural land along the new line. Okay, external costs. So remember, the external costs are the costs to the third party, those who are not involved in the consumption and the production of what has happened. Okay, now in this case, who would be involved in the consumption and the production? That would be the two governments, the governments of China and the government of Kenya. Right? So who's going to lose out here? It's going to be the farmers. The farmers in this case would be the third party because they've lost their agricultural land. They're not involved in that decision-making process. Right? So they will be the third party who has lost out as a result of these railways being built. What is a characteristic of tertiary services? So remember, tertiary services are service sector. So they're located away from centres of population. No, remember they're a service sector. Why would they be located away from where people are? They're providing services for people. They do not sell to the final consumer. Not true. They do sell to the final consumer. They tend to be labour intensive. That is true. Tertiary sector industries do tend to be labour intensive. Again, why? Because they're providing services, and most services are labour intensive methods of operation. They transform raw materials into goods. That is not a tertiary sector. That is the secondary sector. Question 2. What would cause an outward shift of a country's PPC? So remember, an outward shift of a PPC is anything that will cause an increase in the quantity and or the quality of resources. Okay, so let's have a look. A fall in unemployment. So that will just allow us to use our resources more efficiently, right? It's not going to increase the quantity or the quality of resources that we have available. So that means that we would move, if I just draw a quick PPC, a fall in unemployment means we would move from being inefficient, which is inside the curve, to a point that is on the curve, and now we're representing efficiency. It doesn't cause a shift. It's just utilizing more previously underemployed resources. Income tax has nothing to do with it. That's not going to increase the quantity or quality of resources. Reducing expenditure on education is definitely not going to increase quantity and or quality of resources. But if we increase the labour force, that will. Because we're going to have more people available, which means that we may be able to shift our PPC and to make more goods and more services. Okay, in farming, what is an example of what economists call capital? So remember, that's the machinery, the equipment that's being used. One thing is money is not a factor of production, so money is always out. Same with shares. Savings is also another form of money, but the tractor is the equipment or machinery that they need to do their job. So that would be the capital.